What if what you're calling emptiness isn't a breakdown? What if it's the first crack of a breakthrough? What if the numbness, the silence, the collapse of everything you once clung to isn't the end of your story, but the beginning of who you really are? Most people panic when the ground disappears. They run from the void. They try to rebuild what's crumbling. But what no one tells you, but what Meister Eckhart understood, is this: the void is sacred. Before the soul can awaken, it must forget. Before it can expand, it must first be emptied. Destruction is not your enemy. It's the gate. You think you're falling apart. But what's really collapsing is the lie you've mistaken for yourself. Most will never stay long enough in the silence to see this. They'll run. Will you? Most people believe awakening feels like light, like purpose flooding in, like clarity sweeping over you, like a surge of meaning that finally makes sense. But that's the story we're told, not how it really begins. Before the light comes, the void. Not a spark, not a revelation, but a hollowing, a tearing down. A deep, disorienting collapse that feels less like becoming and more like dying. Not the death of the body, but the death of certainty. The death of the old self. The quiet unraveling of everything that once felt solid beneath your feet. You open your eyes one day and realize what once drove you now feels empty. The goals you chased lose their taste. The relationships you held on to no longer reflect who you are. And the version of you that once made sense, the image, the performance, the plan, feels like a costume you can't wear anymore. It's terrifying, because no one warned you that awakening doesn't arrive with celebration. It arrives with collapse. It begins not with fireworks, but with silence. Not with answers, but with a void. You feel detached, uncertain, as if the world is spinning and you've somehow stepped outside of it. This is what they called the sacred desert. The brutal space between ego and soul. Meister Eckhart knew this wasn't a mistake. It was a process. God is not found by adding to the soul, but by subtracting from it. You don't awaken by collecting more. You awaken by releasing what was never truly yours. What hurts is not the emptiness. It's the breaking of the illusion, the collapse of the false self. That mask can't hold the weight of who you're becoming. This emptiness isn't accidental. It's precise. It's sacred. It's preparing space for what's real. But the ego panics here. The ego calls stillness failure. Silence becomes a threat. Emptiness feels like death. So you scramble. You reach for quick answers, cheap distractions, any noise to drown the ache of not knowing who you are anymore. But that ache, that hollow, unfamiliar ache, is not your enemy. It's the invitation. When you stop fleeing from it, when you sit in it instead of filling it, something else begins to rise. The soul, not the self you built, but the truth beneath all the selves you've worn. This is not depression. This is a sacred descent, and descent is not the opposite of rising. It's where rising begins. The seed breaks in the dark before it grows toward the sun. The caterpillar dissolves before it becomes the butterfly. The self must shatter so the soul can surface. So if you're standing here now, hollow, uncertain, still, do not mistake this silence for failure. You are not at the end. You are at the edge of something real. The ego is quiet now, but the soul is finally starting to speak. We've been taught to fear emptiness, to run from silence, to fill every gap with noise, with busyness, with something, anything that makes us feel in control. But what if emptiness isn't a void? What if it's a doorway? To be full of things is to be empty of God. To be empty of things is to be full of God. To the modern mind, this sounds impossible. Empty of things, empty of ambition, identity, desire. But Eckhart wasn't preaching escape or denial. He was pointing to something deeper. You cannot receive the sacred if your hands are full of the artificial. The reason emptiness feels so painful is because we've built our identity on illusions, on roles, not essence, on validation, not connection, on movement, not meaning. And when life begins to subtract, when the roles collapse, when the validation fades, we panic, because what's left feels like nothing. But what's left is the only part of you that was ever real. Beneath the noise, beneath the performance, beneath the version of you shaped by other people's expectations, there is something still, something quiet, something that doesn't care about titles, something that does not fear silence. This is what he called the spark of the soul. The part of you that is already in union with the sacred, but has been buried under layers of distraction. You don't need to earn this self. You need to remember it, and remembering always begins with emptying. Eckhart said, "The soul does not grow by addition, but by subtraction." A sculptor doesn't create by stacking more clay. They create by cutting away everything that is not the form. And you are being carved. You are being stripped back to what's essential. Yes, it feels like loss, because we've been conditioned to think that identity is built by adding more. But the soul isn't asking for more. The soul is asking for real. The soul is asking for space, not just outer space. Inner space, the space where you don't perform, where you don't explain yourself, where you stop clinging to who you were told to be, the space where you can finally just be. And that kind of presence, it's only born through emptiness. Lao Tzu said, "We shape clay into a pot, but it is the emptiness inside that holds what we want." The pot matters because of the space inside. And the soul, the real soul, isn't revealed by what you collect. It's revealed by what you release. This is why emptiness is not the end. It's the beginning, because now, for the first time, there's room. Room for something true. Room for peace. Room for God, not as a belief, but as a direct, felt presence. Not in books, not in titles, not in borrowed doctrines, but in the silence that remains when everything else is gone. This is the mystical truth. Emptiness isn't what's missing, it's what's left. How do you move through life while carrying less? How do you walk without grasping, without clinging, but still remain fully open? The answer isn't passivity, it's presence. And presence demands space. But that space is fragile at first, because the ego hates silence. It rushes to fill the gap. It will throw distractions at you. It will demand your attention. It will try to rebuild the noise. So the first practice is not to resist the ego, but to witness it. Notice how fast you reach. For your phone, for a plan, for validation, not because you truly need it, but because the emptiness feels unbearable. You've been conditioned to fear silence, to mistake stillness for failure, to believe that movement always means progress. But the mystics like Meister Eckhart knew the opposite. The silence is not empty. It's where God lives. It's where the soul speaks. And the soul only speaks when you are quiet enough to hear it. So begin here, with space. One moment in your day, where you don't consume, don't react, don't rush to fix or control. Just sit, right in the ache, right in the quiet, not to escape it, but to stay with it, to hold space for yourself, the way you've always held space for others. Because what the soul is asking for isn't an answer. It isn't a solution. It's your full, unguarded presence. And over time, something begins to shift. What once felt hollow begins to feel expansive, vast, sacred, alive. This is not numbness. It's stillness. And stillness isn't lifeless. It's the foundation of life. When you stop grasping, you start creating. When you stop reaching, you begin receiving. Not because you forced something in, but because you became the space for something deeper to arrive. This is why Eckhart even warned us to release our image of God. Because even spiritual attachment can become a mask for the ego. He said, God is not found in the soul by adding anything, but by a process of subtraction. This path doesn't ask you to reject the world. It asks you to hold it lightly, to live, to love, to build, but from the center, not the edge, not from hunger, but from stillness. You will still feel. You will still fall, but you will no longer collapse under the weight of becoming something you are not. And when fear returns, because it will, you'll remember that fear is the ego, trying to crawl back onto the throne. But the throne is empty now, and in that emptiness, the soul finally sits. The real work isn't to add more. It's to release what was never truly you. And in that quiet, in that space you've spent your life avoiding, you don't find emptiness. You find yourself. What if what you're calling emptiness isn't a breakdown? What if it's the first crack of a breakthrough?